Hey, welcome back to the Oz Shift podcast. Today we have a great conversation about human behavior. And on top of that, not just the behavior that's an idea, but how this conversation came to be, which is from a person who was homeless, heroin addict, like almost looking at 50 years in jail. Like this person, they battled a lot. And I always tell people, you should not be telling people how to run the race until you've crossed some finish lines. This person has run a lot of races, has stumbled a lot of races, but crossed a ton of finish lines. And now is a behavior coach, has a podcast that has 25 plus million downloads. He serves at a high level. His name's Eric Zimmer. So today, as we dive into this episode, I want you to tune in and see where you can pull ideas for what you might be battling, the conversations you have in your head. His whole podcast he does is called The One You Feed, the two wolves in your head. So it's about how do you feed that good wolf, the one that serves you, that's kind, that's going to help you become that next level, as opposed to letting the negative wolf, the bad ideas, the bad thoughts, be the thing that anchors you to a life that you may not love, So when you can understand how to have this dance in your head and feed the right wolf, you see how to grow to something amazing. And he uncovers all of that in our episode today. So without further ado, let's hop into the episode. All right, welcome to the show. So you know our guest a little bit. We're going to get to know him a lot more. In this conversation, we're going to unpack some things that we're going to give you some, hopefully, depth of understanding of your humanity, how to be able to take insight from other people, ourselves, especially our guests, and be able to apply it to your life to help make things cool and better. Because here's a cool thing. I like when we get people on the show who've crossed finish lines, who've gone through some things that are a little bit crazier than most, and come out of that and come back and go, hey, I ran that race. Here's how not to run the race, or here's how to do it better than what I did, right? And that's kind of the cool way we navigate this. And we'll find out about their off shift moments. So without further ado, we're going to talk to my new friend, we'll call it, Eric Zimmer, man. How are you?
Good, Anthony. How are you?
I'm doing well, dude. I'm excited to chat with you today because, well, I don't get to talk to cool people every day. I get to talk to some awesome people, but your story, what we're going to unpack today, actually is one like I connect to because I grew up in foster care, had a lot of craziness happen. And so there's a really like a deep kindred feel to the people who like come from the bottom. And so you literally have done that, right? So as we dive into this, man, I'm excited to unpack all of you. Here's how I start the conversation, though. It's always one question, and I'm going to talk way less. You'll talk way more. But I say if I'm walking around town, I sit down at a coffee shop. I don't know you. You got a cool, Mo hockey thing going on. I go, who is this dude? And for some reason, you feel compelled to start talking to me. In your personal opinion, why should I listen to you?
Well, that is a great first question. Why should you listen to me? Because I have been in the trenches with everything that I talk about, everything that I share, everything that I teach, everything that I do there is an element of lived experience to it.
Yeah.
I've coached over 500 people from all around the world. I've interviewed over 500 really smart people about this stuff. So I think those three sort of reasons. One is I've lived it. Two, I've tried to help other people with it. And three, I've tried to learn from the best about these ideas.
I like it, man. I like it a lot. I think we're going to start there at the area of I've lived it, because I'll sometimes dive into other places of what you've done and how you've gone through it. But I think you're a person, I really want people to understand the depth of when you say I've lived it, so people understand like, oh, this is why I should listen to this dude. So if you don't mind, whatever you feel is pertinent to people knowing about you and your background, do you mind sharing that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting is you shared growing up in foster homes and all sorts of crazy things. I grew up in a relatively stable, middle class, suburban life. There were things that didn't happen in my childhood as far as parenting and different things that caused me, I think, to be some of the way I am. But a lot of where I ended up, I feel like, I kind of drove myself to the bottom to a large extent.
Yeah.
But by the time I was 24 years old, I was a homeless heroin addict. I weighed 100 pounds.
Wow.
I had hepatitis C. I was looking at going to jail for up to 50 years.
Wow.
Multiple felonies pending. I had basically destroyed my life.
Yeah.
And so from there, I've been able to sort of build what I think is a really great and fulfilling life. And so I think the lessons from that I've learned apply not just to people who are in that bad of a situation, although there are lots of people whose situations are really, really bad, but I think all the minor ways that we all struggle,
Yeah.
right? We all struggle with living according to our values. We all struggle with managing difficult thoughts and difficult emotions. We all struggle with, what coping mechanisms do we use to deal with what is, in many cases and at different times, can be a very difficult world.
Would you equate some of the stuff you just listed as to how you ended up where you did? Because if you say I came from a good place, like I got kids who have a privileged life, and I'm like, man, it would be heartbreaking to see my kids go that way. And I'm always curious, like, what got you there? Not that we have to go super deep into it, but you just
Yeah.
do things. Would that be the like? Were you unpacking things that you wish you knew back then?
Well, I mean, what got me there, what causes somebody to be an addict or what causes somebody to have depression? Those things are, as they would say in the scientific literature, multivariant, meaning like there's a bunch of causes, right? We can't go back and go, it was just this thing or that thing. Broad strokes, I would say I was a very sensitive child.
Mhm.
And I had parents that were really both in a bad place in different ways. My dad had depression, but that showed up as just a lot of real anger. Like everybody in the neighborhood was terrified to come to my
Oh
house because of
wow.
my dad.
Hmm.
My mom had depression, and that just showed up as sort of being vacant, not really there. So
Yeah,
I think there were a lot of things for whatever reason. By the time I was 10 years old, I was a kleptomaniac. Like I
been
was
there.
just stealing to
Crazy.
steal, man,
Yeah.
right? Because I think it made me feel alive, you know? And I think my response to my household was to kind of deaden everything inside of me.
Mm,
And so things like stealing and then alcohol and drugs actually made me feel alive. So, I
interesting.
mean, I think those are some of the reasons, but at the end, I think that addictive behavior or compulsive behavior is almost always a coping mechanism for something that is difficult to feel or deal with. We don't know how to,
Ooh.
and so in that way, um, yeah, recovery for me has been about learning, okay, how do I deal with these feelings or lack of feelings in certain
Huh.
cases, right? If it's numbness or deadness, how do I deal with that in a way that doesn't involve, in my case, driving my life off the cliff?
Yeah.
But for lots of people, it just involves things like, well, I spend way too much time on my phone, or
Mm,
I play video games for
yeah.
3 hours a night and I wish I did something else. I mean, so it doesn't always have to be drastic and
Yeah.
terrible, but
Just some.
we do respond, and we have coping mechanisms that some are better than others.
I never thought of it that way. The idea that the addiction is an aspect in that window there where it's tied to, you like solve or deal with something in a certain way. Like it's an addiction that it's almost like you're seeking something that's going to be that dopamine dump, that way for your brain to feel, and you're finding it in places that probably aren't the healthiest, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, and for some people, addiction is a very much a response to severe trauma, right? We know from the research, the more um, trauma you have suffered, and both, big T trauma, like being physically or sexually abused, or
Yeah.
lowercase T trauma, right? Like having a father who's always yelling at you for, 10 years,
Yeah.
that people who have trauma are far more likely to become addicts. It's just
Interesting.
it is a now not everybody who has trauma becomes an addict, and not everybody who's an addict has trauma,
True.
but we do know that
Relation.
there's a very, very high correlation.
That makes sense. Where's the edge of because I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, I get on my kids. I don't yell. I'm a very peaceful, happy person. But like
Yeah.
there's certain windows where I'm like, I need my boys and my daughter to have certain skill sets that their life won't provide the way it provided for mine. Right. So
Yep.
I need to have some hard, but it's like, so I got to create the hardship oddly. Usually it's in fitness or chores or like, homework, but
Hmm.
things done. But what point, like, do I do I understand or know like what's too far? Like, how do you know when someone's hit that
Mm.
edge? Because I think the last thing anyone wants to do is push someone to that level because they're having a big T in their head, but you're like, it's nothing. It's what are you worried about?
Yeah.
But like, how do you navigate that from a person the outside looking in at someone who's dealing that to be able to not do that to somebody?
Well, that is a really good question, and a difficult question. And different people have different ideas and values and thoughts around parenting.
Hmm.
I think that my son is 24 years old, and I didn't parent him in any way, shape, or form perfectly. But what I aimed for with him, which is very similar to what I aim for myself or with somebody I'm coaching, which is to say, like, to show them the truth and the reality, and allow there to be some accountability to what matters to that person.
Yeah.
but to do it in a kind and supportive way and always be focused on behavior, not person, right? I mean, that's a
Mhm.
very fundamental
Yeah.
distinction, right? Is like, I'm talking about this behavior you just did,
Mhm.
not who you are, because that's where shame starts to creep in, right?
Right. It does.
Is when we start
Yeah.
to think, I didn't do something bad, I am bad.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the message, I think um, that can be helpful. But how tough to be on
Mm.
kids different people have differing
Hard. Yeah.
opinions, based on what you want.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I think that life tends to provide enough hardship generally
Yeah.
that like, I didn't feel a need to go out of my way to add it,
Mhm.
to my son. But, in the same way as you're saying, there were expectations around like, okay, if you're in school, you're going, you've got homework to do.
Got your homework. Yeah.
You're going to do well at it, right? Oh,
Mhm.
you signed up to be on a sports team. That means you're going to practice. That means,
100%.
well, you made this commitment. Like,
Yeah.
you know, a general show up and do your best,
Yeah.
and I think if someone, I always looked at my kids like, if he's doing his best, then that's enough.
I agree.
What I felt like with my father was that my best would never be good enough,
Mm. That's different. That's
and
a whole
so
different mindset.
yeah,
And I get
totally,
that because, like, with my kids, that's the big thing. Like, I never care about how good they do in their sports or anything. It's just I can tell when you're not trying to give your full effort, and that's the thing
yeah,
that I'll get on for. And then it's also interesting is like last year I chose not to coach my son in football. I'm a former NFL player. Like I've
yeah,
got a wealth of knowledge. I'm a coach, so I'm not the guy that like I play but don't know how or why I was good. And so I can relay it back to him. But there's times when like he'll come home from us doing stuff, and mom will ask him how was it today at football? Oh, I got in trouble. But what do you mean you got in trouble? Oh, well, you yelled at me for that thing. I go, yeah, but I wasn't yelling at you for the thing. I was just yelling at the thing you did. Like it wasn't that you did anything wrong. It was like
yeah,
the thing you did. So it's like there's that balance because it's a separation where I think he doesn't quite understand parenting and coaching. And I think that ties to the my dad doesn't love me versus, oh, he's
hmm,
this position of what I did. I made the wrong read, or I didn't tackle the guy the way I should have, or I didn't give full effort. And while that's a simple thing, we're talking about athletics, that does apply to everything, even outside of sports. It's the way somebody does a certain thing. Like I think that there are ways people parent. I like how you're differentiating that. It's like you got to be aware. It's not the person. Like talk to the behavior of what they did, but not
yeah.
like biblically they'd say, hate the sin, love the sinner. I guess that concept
Yes,
rings true too, right?
that's exactly it. And I want to, my father just passed last
Sorry.
week, so I want to. Part of what I'm doing now is looking at the narrative I have around me and my father, and really reflecting on, all the good things that he did. Right, like he really tried to spend, or he did spend, really quality time with me when I was a kid. The
Mhm.
problem was that he was so unhappy in general that time for me was sort of, I didn't enjoy it because I was
Yeah.
afraid the whole time.
Mhm.
But he was doing the very best that he could
Yeah.
with what he was given,
Yeah.
and I'm able to look back at some of that. So, I think this, when we start to talk about why we are the way we are, and we start to examine our childhoods, right? There's a very um, it's a difficult line to navigate. I guess it's the same thing. Hate the sin, love the sinner, right?
Yeah. I get
Like,
that.
okay, I don't like the thing. I wish my parents had had better skills than they had,
Yeah. Did I try to
and
live that? Yeah.
yet I know they loved me, and I know they did the best they can. Both those things can be true. It wasn't enough, and it caused these sort of things that I have to work out, and it was the best that they can do. And so I think having both those perspectives is important, because I think people get stuck into one or the other, which is, my parents were great, they did everything, they did the best they could, I'm just the way, I got to deal with it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Versus the other, which is like, oh, woe is me, everything was so terrible, I was damaged, I was hurt,
Yeah. Blame it on
and
them.
blame it on them. And I think there's a middle place that says, yeah, I acknowledge the things that maybe didn't, the things that I'm carrying out of my childhood,
Yeah.
trauma, neglect, whatever it is, the things I'm carrying that I need to now work on,
Hmm.
my responsibility. And I can also, recognize that responsibility and move on. That's the only
I
place to move from,
Yeah.
right?
It's like, I think it's, Manson says something along the lines of like, "It's not my fault, but it's my responsibility." the thing that
Yeah.
I'm talking to now. But prior to that, so I had, a lot of anger growing up as a kid, which it sounds like you probably had some of the same, maybe feelings that led to wherever you went, where it's
Hmm.
just, man, I'm so angry. How could you do this to me? And I had a lot of that. I was pissing my mom for giving me away, my real dad, not coming back to help me and like finding him later in life. You get these anger points. What's interesting is it took me like into my mid 30s to go like, oh, you know what? The things they did, like they weren't to maliciously hurt me. It was a person
Right.
who was imperfect, doing things that, if anything, there was selfishness to it to make myself feel good, even to satiate their desires in the moment, but it wasn't to outwardly, intentionally hurt me. I go, man, there's actually a sense of compassion you have for that. Like
Yes.
I feel bad knowing that they felt so bad they did that to another person. It sucks it was me, but like separate from that, I go, man, I wish they could have been helped and served differently. So it gave me a chance to forgive better.
Yeah, absolutely. I see a lot of my parents. I think maybe we all start to at a certain age. I can see a lot of things of the personality, um, inheritance from my parents, and I can feel like, yeah, boy, I work really hard and I have a lot of tools and I live in a completely different culture, and with all this support to be the best version of myself that I can be,
Yeah.
right? And it's still challenging, and they had almost none of that, right? They just didn't have it. It didn't exist in that way when, I'm 52 years old, right? It just simply didn't exist that way 50
Yeah.
years ago. The world was different, the support was different, the expectation of what a parent was different, all
Mhm.
that stuff.
Yeah.
So if I go back to their time, what they were going through, what they were trying to do, what they inherited from their parents, yeah, it's like compassion for sure.
Yeah, that's big, man. I like that. I like it a lot because I think that's the one thing people they try to figure like, how did you get through that stuff and you have peace? Because I can tell you're a peaceful human, but at one point, I'm sure I did not want to be near you. Like, there's probably some things you're like, huh? Right. So how did you get out of that place? If we're there at 24, there
Yeah.
had to have been some, catalyst moment that goes, oh, what am I doing? This can't be where I end up. What was that? And then how'd you approach it?
Yeah, it's interesting because there are catalyst moments, and at the same time there are thousands of small decisions that follow on from that,
True.
that it takes. You may have a catalyst moment where you decided, I'm going to be an NFL player, right? Great, good. And then you had countless
Yeah.
grueling workouts and efforts and all the dedication. And I think something like recovery or sobriety is something similar. Yes, there were epiphany moments where I went, oh shit, look at what's happening. Um, the last one for me was, but I had been in treatment multiple times, so I had tried in various ways before, so I had had other moments like this, like, oh shit, this can't go on.
Yeah.
um but I'm swearing, I hope that's all right on your
That's all right.
show.
It will be fine.
I'll try and avoid it in the future.
It
um
happens. I've never had anybody report us or get mad. So far, I mean,
all
we ain't
right.
gotta go like, Andrew Frisella on them or like Tony
Yeah.
Robbins with events,
Yeah.
but yeah, it'd be okay. We're gonna survive.
Okay. All right. But the last moment for me was, I was homeless. And by homeless, I mean I was living in the back of a really old, lousy van
Yeah.
that the person I worked for owned. And basically, one night at work, it was a restaurant. A couple police officers walked in, and they came, right through the whole restaurant. They're not sitting down at any tables, and they walk in the kitchen, and they're like, I'm a cook.
Mhm.
Are you Eric Zimmer? Well, geez, who's asking? Right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I want to answer that question. But anyway, I got arrested,
Mm.
taken away. I lost the van I was living in, and I ended up in a detox center. This really lousy place. It was an old tuberculosis hospital, but I went because I had enough of a heroin habit that I knew I was going to be really sick, and I just didn't know where I was going to get the money. I mean, just for a variety of reasons. And I went, and they said to me there, you need more treatment.
Mm.
You need to go to our 30-day program. And,
Yeah.
and I thought, no, I'm not doing that.
Mm.
I've got this great, I got this great life I got to get back
Yeah.
to.
The
I got to
vanity.
get up out of here. Right.
Yeah.
Um, and so, but I went back to my room, and I just had in 12-step programs, we refer to them as a moment of clarity, right? I had a moment of clarity, and it was very clear to me in that moment, like, if I leave here, I'm either going to die, right? I'm 100 pounds. I have hepatitis C. I could overdose at any time, or they are going to lock me up.
Yeah.
for a long time, right? That's going to happen. So I went back and I said, you know what? All right, I'll go into long-term treatment. So that was the catalytic moment, right?
Mhm.
Right there where I made the decision to accept more help and kind of try and go all in. As all in as I knew how to do at that point in my life on my recovery.
Yeah.
And then from there, like I said, it was just countless, moments over and over and over again of choosing to do another 12-step phrase, the next right thing, right? What's the next right thing in front of me? Go
Mm.
to a meeting, call my sponsor, work on my steps, go to the gym, whatever, we all have the next thing in our life that we
Yeah.
do that brings about the results we want. And after I got a little bit into that, I started to have true hope. I started to really be like, oh, I don't have to live this way. And I don't, I think we talk a lot about the importance of consequences with
Yeah.
addicts
Mhm.
and alcoholics, and consequences are important, right? If everything's going great with your drinking and it's just a wonderful thing in life, nobody's going to quit. Why would you? It's
Yeah.
enjoyable,
Mhm.
right? Like, of course not,
People say I got a
right?
drinking problem, but I got no problem drinking at all.
Yeah, exactly. So consequences are important, but they're not enough, right? Because I think at the moment that consequences are coming, we also need to find hope. And when those two things come together, a true desire to change and then a belief that there is a way to change and that I can change and that the support is there to help me change, those two things provide pretty fertile ground, for a recovery to grow out of.
Makes sense. That's good. I mean, because I mean, all the things you're talking to, while people may not have, we'll call it a situation of addiction or being in that kind of place, I think that same thing happens in regular life. You can have a corporate job where you're in the middle of this stuff and you're just doing stuff like maybe you're just too addicted to pornography or too addicted to your phone, or maybe you're too addicted to the
Yep.
job. And these things could really seep in ways you don't see. So I guess what's one of the core lessons you pulled from all that? Because there's got to be something that's like a golden thread that you must like anchor to, or you find yourself saying a bunch of times. Like, what would that kind of, I guess, maybe one or a couple different things that were some lessons come out of that for you?
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot. I mean, I just gave one of them, which is like, what's the next right thing, right? Just oftentimes life gets confusing, it gets overwhelming. We embark on some sort of change and it feels like too much. And it can just be helpful to be like, what is the next right thing to do? What is the next thing I have to do?
Yeah,
Just what is it? Focus on that very thing.
yeah,
So, for example, if you're trying to, let's say, not use pornography, right? You just decided that's important to you. If you think about like I'm never going to do this again, that feels overwhelming. You're trying to give it up forever, and
mhm,
you can't give anything up forever in the moment. It
yeah,
doesn't work that way,
mhm.
right? So what you could do is say, all right, the next right thing for me right now is to just get up and walk away from the computer.
Smart. Yeah,
Like that's
simple.
it.
Yeah,
That's simple. That focus,
I
right?
like
So
that.
I think that's one thing, and then I think the other that is important when we're talking about changing behavior is to be very clear on why it matters.
Yeah,
In my case, it was starkly obvious, right? Like, oh, I'm going to die or go to jail. Those are pretty high stakes.
yeah,
But for most of us, the stakes aren't very high for looking at my phone one more time.
mhm,
So we have to really reflect on, okay, what is the reason? What matters here? Why is this important? Oh, it's because it's taking me away from being with my children.
yeah,
Well, why is that important? Well, because soon they're going to be grown up and gone. I mean, whatever your reasons are, but you get to the heart, the emotional heart of why something matters to
mhm,
you, because that is the fuel that we do need. There's a lot more than just that in order to change a behavior, but we do need to understand the fuel, and we are emotional creatures. We just
yeah,
really are. And so what is the underlying emotional reason why not being on my phone as much matter?
mm. I think I like that. I like the language you use of behavior. Because I think a lot of people it's almost, I feel like we're over conditioned for the word habits, and habits are a piece
Hmm.
of it, right? But habits are things you do, but behavior is like a way you respond. It's a way you function. I think it's sometimes unconscious also. You just do things and then you like pop up and go, oh, how did that happen? But if you check your behavior, you'll notice it. So I know
Yeah.
that that's kind of like, is that something you anchor down to? Because I haven't heard the word behavior used in the way you just used it. Instead, I go, oh, there's got to be something unique there you talk to.
Well, I do, in my coaching work that I've done with people, I do describe myself as a behavior coach.
Gotcha. Okay.
And the reason that I do that is that at the end of the day, our behaviors determine the quality of our lives. They determine,
Great.
you know, are we living a life that we feel good about, that we feel proud about, that is who we want to be? It ultimately does come down to behavior. Of course, thoughts matter, emotions matter, but what gets tallied is, our behaviors, the
Yeah.
sum of our behaviors, right? So that's one reason that I'm a sort of focus on being a behavior coach.
What are some of the
The
behaviors that people? Well, I was gonna let you keep talking. If I go off this, my brain's gonna lose this question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Talking to the behavior portion of it, and I go, well, what are some of the behaviors people may be doing and not aware of the dire consequence? Because I think there's things that we do we don't realize are extrapolating to things that are problematic in the end.
Yep.
It's in your experience, if you coach a lot of people, what do you see typically as like a core behavior a lot of people have, but are unaware of its detriment later?
Well, I mean, the three that the three that just popped to my mind right now, but I think it's important.
Yeah,
I'll give you
keep
those in
going,
a
come back to
second.
it.
I think it's important though to say that a behavior that's problematic for some person may not be problematic at all for someone else based on their values and what matters to them,
I see
right?
that for
The
sure. Yeah,
structure of their life, right? Like if you've got 3 kids at home and you're spending 3 hours a day playing video games, that might be a real problem because you love your kids and you care about them and you're not giving them attention.
yeah,
If you are a bachelor and video games is what you love to do, that may simply not be a problem.
true.
So context really, really matters. But
Yeah,
I mean, I think a couple of the ones that are really big ones that all extrapolate out are our diet, right? Our diet extrapolates out, right?
yeah.
It has long term compounding effects for good or bad.
Interesting. I wouldn't
You
have thought
know,
of one. That's a. I'm curious. What the next two are. If diet's the first one.
well, I mean, let's give one big group to just health, right? Diet, exercise, sleep, like all those things have compounding benefits. We all know people who are, well, I won't say we all, I think
We likely
I
do.
know
Statistically,
lots of, you can look at people and be like, oh, look, there's a 60-year-old person. And some 60-year-old people are thriving and they are in the prime of their life. And other 60-year-old people are not in very good shape,
true.
right? They're deteriorating quickly, right? They are entering into old age. And a lot of that is simply lifestyle choices that
Yeah.
add up over time. And that's what is so tricky about these little behaviors is in the one of them doesn't matter, right? One cupcake simply doesn't matter, except for the fact that one cupcake makes you a little bit more likely to have the next cupcake, right?
Yeah.
Which then it compounds over time. So I think health behaviors all fall into that
Definitely with that.
category.
You're right.
Um, I think attention is a big one, right? And like what am I doing with my time? Where is my attention? That adds up over time, right? It's you know, um, for a lot of people it's just time spent on their phone, and people spend time on their phones in lots of different ways,
Mhm.
but a lot of people that I know, if you ask them how valuable is that time, they would say it's not.
Yeah. At all.
They're just distracting themselves, right? We all do it, right? But that over time adds up.
Yeah.
30 minutes on Facebook doesn't matter, except that it makes it more likely you might spend another 30 minutes on Facebook again
True.
and again and again. And then you wake up one day and go, oh, I have spent over the last 5 years 400 hours
Yeah.
on Facebook. And again, now some people will say that time is worth it. Like I have really good people that I connect with. I'm part of a
Yeah.
couple groups that support me, right? So that's back to the context.
Yeah.
For me, when I am online and I've got my phone and I'm sort of mindlessly doing stuff, it doesn't. It adds no real value to my life,
I'd agree. Same here.
right? It's just a distraction. So those are the sort of things that kind of add up over time. And they're difficult, though, to get a handle on because the consequences are typically further off. We are simply not good at humans at really responding to things that are, imagining what the effects of something will be like 10 years from now.
Yeah.
You know,
There's actually
it,
studies
it
around that.
yeah. I mean, if we were, everybody'd be saving for retirement at 20, right? Because you'd be like, look, man, this is not, this is
Yeah.
not going to go well, right?
Yeah.
But we don't. I didn't, you know. So I think those are a couple examples of the sort of behaviors I think that compound, but almost all behavior compounds,
That makes sense.
um, for good and bad, right? The flip side of that is, going to the gym every day is going to add up into a whole lot of good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, but better if you're going there. That's the best way you can improve the body and a lot of other things too, man. And then, well, if we go back to your behaviors, right? So you're in this situation where you have this going on. I mean, I would have to imagine, like, just I'm sure statistics would show that not everybody ends up where you're at, right? Probably a
No.
very small percentage of people do what you're doing, the level you do it. I mean, multiple millions, tens of millions of downloads of your podcast. And once you're at this level, what are some of the behaviors that you put into place for yourself that allowed you to at least climb out of there? And then what are the ones you have in place now that have excelled you to where you're at?
Well, I mean, I start so in addition to, addiction, I think that I don't think that, I know that I have struggled with depression through a lot of my adult life. And I think that, whether that's a consequence of my addiction, whether that was a cause of my addiction, I'm not real sure. I don't know.
Yeah,
Um, so for me to deal with that skillfully has really meant, for me, the health stuff is really important.
gotcha.
Exercise, eating well, getting enough sleep. Those things are really important. They're good for your physical health, but for me, they're crucial for my mental and emotional health.
What read the
So
book Spark by Dr. John Rady?
I know of it. Yeah, yeah,
One, it would
yep,
help you clarify that a lot. I
yeah.
recommend that to help you get understanding of what that's going on there.
Yeah. Well, and I think, that can be a really powerful way. I think that when I realized that I was exercising, eating right, and getting enough sleep, not to forestall something that's going to happen 50 years from now, although that's important, I'm doing it because it makes me feel better today,
Hmm.
right now, very soon.
Yeah,
And that shift for me was a really, you talk about shifts, right? That was a big shift for me when I went, oh, I'm doing this because it makes me happier. Okay, wow. All right. So for me, health behaviors have been very fundamental. And when I haven't done them in my adult life, I struggle more.
hmm,
Um, Meditation is a pretty big one for me. I've just gone kind of deep into what my spiritual practice is. So meditation has been one for me. I think for many people, maybe it doesn't have to be meditation, but some sort of contemplative practice, some amount of time in silence, some amount of time in reflection is really valuable.
yeah,
Um, I think the other behavior is one of asking myself very often, you know, what am I doing, and is it what I want to be doing? Like how trying to sort of, without, having to go off and do a values exercise that requires me to go on a week-long workshop or sit on top of a mountain and journal, although that's all valuable stuff, just to really be thinking what matters to me,
yeah.
and am I living that way? That is a sort of, the more often I think we reflect on that, the more likely our lives will be where we want them to be. The
Okay,
more likely that they will be a reflection of who we want to be versus just being on autopilot.
I agree.
Because life will sweep you into autopilot in a hurry, and you'll just sort of go along with whatever's coming up, even if it's not what matters to you.
Yeah,
So I think that's another behavior for me that has been critical to getting where I am,
yeah.
is that very frequent reflection on, like, what matters to me? What do I want here? Who do I want to be?
I think it's
You
big because
know?
I live in that same manner. I even would say like there's a piece to it that would be like your North Star. Like what's the center point? Because then you can
Yeah.
compare that to somewhere. Because for me, like I'm in what I call season of dad, which means I'm trying to be home. I would mention this. You're like more nomadic, and
Hmm.
I'm more like I'm here. I want to be present. I want to be. But that means that when I'm asked that question, which I do in the beginning, when I asked that question, I didn't like the answer, man. I was like, oh, you're not being that guy. But you're not. You say season of dad, you're not aligning. So at first, it's met with this. Ooh, I get icky. Like I don't want to face that,
Yes.
but I had to face it. The more you face it, the more you start getting closer to making actions that are in the direction of the place you've been saying you want to go as a North Star.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you make a really good point. We can talk about, like, well, live according to your values, and it sounds like this great thing. It is difficult to do.
Hmm.
And it is often an unpleasant reflection. I've got a couple different programs I lead people through, and in one of them we do a really deep dive into values, and that module for a lot of people is really difficult because it brings them up against places that they're falling short. Um, I think, though, a really helpful reframe is to recognize that is always going to happen. There's that old analogy of a plane, right? Like a plane takes off and, it's always veering off course just a little bit. And it's constantly sort of, you're having to sort of refocus on the destination, right?
Yeah.
And so I think our lives are a matter of we always get a little off course,
Mm.
always.
Yeah.
And so if we know that, then we can go, oh, look, I'm off course again. Season of Dad. I'm off course with Season of Dad. Get back on course. And if we can minimize the emotional drama that goes with that, right? Oh, I'm such a bad person. What's the matter with me? If we can keep that to a minimum and just go, yeah, of course. Like life's got a lot of demands. I'm a busy guy. I'm getting pulled lots of directions. I'm a little off course. Just get back on course.
Yeah.
The more that we can do that without, like I say, without as much emotional drama, the more often we're willing to do it. Versus if every time we take a look at our behavior and we notice it's off and we spiral into, oh my God, I'm so terrible, we won't do it because we won't want to do it.
Yeah.
It'll be frightening to do it. So, I mean, I always say with coaching clients, like whatever we're trying to build, recognize that like you're going to get off track. It's inevitable. The question we need to be asking and the skill we need to be teaching is how do you get back on track quickly?
I like that.
Because you're going to get off. It's
Yeah.
inevitable.
Human. It's literally
Yeah.
inevitable. it's, I mean, it happens to me. I feel like weekly I'm doing something like that. I'm not in line, right? But there's
Yeah.
the back on track thing. And
Yeah.
so if we think to that, let's say someone's sitting there going, okay, great. I have an idea of what I want to do. I'm off track. I'm getting back on track. That dance gets difficult, man. It gets heavy over
Mhm.
time. It's this almost like you start going like, is it really the most important? Am I really good at this? Like, what do you have to say to the journey of it all? Right. Cause
Mhm.
that's where it's at. It's the journey of this up and down roller coaster of I'm on track, off track, on track, off track. If we were a roller coaster, we would have been out of business a long time ago. But how do
Yeah.
you like
Yeah.
approach that for people?
I think it is a certain degree of accepting that's the way things are. Like my big project this year for me is writing a book. And so there's all sorts of doubt and uncertainty that goes into that all the time.
Hmm.
you know it's and but what's been helpful for me is to read and learn about other authors, and I've had the opportunity to have so many on my show and talk to them, and I know them, and they all are like, yeah, man, geez, there are tons of days where I think I'm not good enough, I don't have it,
Yeah.
this idea is terrible, this I didn't work on it very hard this week. I mean, and so even in the really successful people, by and large, they also are going through this. They've just learned how to handle it.
Mm.
They've learned how to say, yep, okay, geez, yep, this is a constant process of monitoring where I'm at and just adjusting,
Yeah.
recognizing like, oh, I'm feeling uncertain about this. That's the nature of creating something.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm building a new business. I don't know anybody who builds a new business that doesn't have m- lots of moments of fear, uncertainty, doubt, all of that. It comes with the
Natural.
territory. If you think having that as a problem, then you think you're not cut out for it,
True. When really,
right?
yeah, you are. You just
Yeah,
push past it.
yeah, yeah. You just because I think a lot of us think that the people who are successful, it's relatively easy for them to be successful.
Mm.
And I imagine, I mean, you succeeded at the highest levels, right? I'm sure you know tons of people who've succeeded at the highest levels. So many of the guests on my show have been very successful in whatever it is they're doing.
Yeah.
And what I know from talking to so many people is that very thing. Like we all sometimes doubt our ability to do it.
Yeah.
That's just natural. And
It's like
so how do you learn to work with that in the most skillful way?
yeah, it's like the idea of the imposter syndrome. I got a client of mine. He's like, hey, he's been phenomenal as a jiu-jitsu competitor, world renowned. He's amazing. But he wants to start speaking, and he goes, I don't know, man. I'm not great at that. Like, and I go, yeah, but at the end of the day, there's almost a natural, we'll call it imposter you should have because you haven't done that yet. However, while you're not great, you should never question your ability to get great. There's a
Yes.
different lean on you can do in that space there.
100%. I think that is the key piece. It's, in psychology they call it the growth mindset,
Yeah.
right? It's just the belief that like I don't think I'm not a great writer right now. I'm going to just be honest, I'm not, right? I haven't done it. But I know that I can get better.
Hmm.
I know that I will get better.
Yeah.
I know that if I care and try, I will get better. Now, how good I will get, I don't know. None of us know that,
Yeah.
right?
True.
Like if I decided I wanted to play football and I get really into football, I've got a pretty good guess I'm not going to play in the NFL. I'm 52 years old.
Well, me too, by the way, anymore. Yeah.
I'm 100 and, I'm 145 pounds. I mean, like it's not going to happen.
Mhm.
But how good I could get at football, we don't know. I could get much better,
Yes.
right? And so I think most things in life are that way. We may not become the best at something, but maybe we will. We don't know.
Yeah.
But we can get way, way, way better, far better usually than we think.
Mhm.
You know, it's
Yeah.
back to that idea earlier that we were talking about things compounding, right? It's amazing what a series of really small steps taken again and again and again and again. My favorite phrase that I use in my spiritual habits program is that little by little, a little becomes a lot,
Yeah. It's big.
right? That's how we change.
Mhm.
We change a little bit. We become a little bit better at whatever the thing is each
Yeah.
day. We just keep trying.
Yeah. That's like so I work in identity. Like that's my thing is who are you when you're not thinking about who you are? Because that's the
Mm,
behavior parser, right? And I go, what gets us there? And it's the small little things we do. And I actually look at it, I call it dark work. It's the work you do in the dark that allows you to shine in the light. And
yeah.
I call them dark work deposits. What are you depositing every single day that build that dark energy to where when you shine in the light, you can fuel that light with that energy you need from
Mm,
whether it's confidence or skill set or whatever it is. But there is always that part of it where your brain steps into something and goes, "Oh, but can I?" Like I played in the NFL, but I'd be lying if I said I stepped in a field and never had a thought of like, what if I mess up, you know? And I think you alluded to that earlier, like the conversations in your mind. And I believe your podcast
hmm
is about the one you feed. Do you mind unpacking? 'Cause I think we're right in that little pocket where it's a great thing to step into, and you've already done this for years. So you mind
hmm
sharing more of that?
About what the parable in the podcast is,
Yeah, because
or
I think that
about
ties the idea we're talking about. Is you're literally saying like it's you
yeah,
can get great little by little, but that's a thought you have, and I believe it's
yeah,
probably in action how you approach difficult situations, and every successful person does. But I think it's a part that more people need to understand. Like, yeah, you're gonna have that, but here's how you approach that.
yeah. I mean, my podcast starts. I ask every guest. I read this little parable, and we don't know where the parable comes from. Some people think it's Native American. Some people insist it isn't. We don't know,
Yeah,
but many of you will have heard it. And it's just that we have two wolves inside of us that are always at battle. One's a good wolf, represents things like kindness, bravery, and love, and the other's a bad wolf, which represents things like greed and hatred and fear. And which wolf wins? Well, the one you feed, right? And the reason I love that parable and it means so much to me is, I mean, I heard it early in recovery, and I suddenly, it just landed on me like you know a 1,000 pounds, where I went, oh yeah, geez, okay, I have a very clear choice here.
mhm,
What am I going to feed? But in our moment to moment lives, I think we're always sort of doing that. And the reason I like the parable is it makes it very clear that for all of us, both those things are there, right? You are not wrong. There's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken. You're not bad. You're uh, not going to succeed because you have doubt, because you have fear, because you have uncertainty. Like that, everybody does. It's normal. It's part of being human. It's
yeah,
what is the response to that?
mhm,
How do we respond to that? And I think the first way of responding to that is to recognize what's happening. I think that awareness is the first step in any kind of change. Like,
mm,
what's going on here, and what do I want to be different? And so, recognizing the thoughts that we're having and not being so attached to them. And by that I mean just recognizing that just because it's a thought that I'm having doesn't mean it's true or accurate. It's just a thought. It's a literally a um, thing that comes up as a result of countless causes and conditions that have gone into our mind over
mm,
lots of years, not to mention all sorts of different chemical processes. Some of our thoughts are closer to reality than others.
yeah, that
And
makes sense.
so, what are they? And how do I work with them more skillfully?
Smart man, and I think that's the thing that's the key for a lot of people because I think we don't realize we have naturally thoughts running through our head. Even there's a lot of studies that show like the thoughts kind of suck, man. I think the National Science Foundation did a study. It's everybody knows about it for the most part, but like the thoughts you have of them, some 85% are negative thoughts,
Yep.
95% of them are repetitive, right? And you have
Yeah.
60,000 every single day. And so if you don't take, I think, inventory of your thoughts and then actually
Yeah.
think about them, then they just run rampant.
They do. I'm always amazed by how I can be thinking about something over and over and over again without really knowing I'm thinking about it. It's some
Yeah.
bizarre It's a very, but yeah. I mean, that voice in our heads, it tends to be, like you said, negative and repetitive. Like if I had a friend that was like the voice in my head,
Yeah.
we would not be friends for long. I'd be
Exactly.
like, dude, you are really a drag.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
you are really a drag. I'm going to go hang out with somebody else.
Yeah. I'd agree, man. I would thoroughly agree. Man, you're a wealth of knowledge, but not just that. I like the way that you have like a connection to humanity with the knowledge. Like there's some people that can be really book smart and read a lot of things, but like there's a depth of like understanding that I think most people don't carry to most of their conversations. So I appreciate you.
Hmm,
Without
thank
having
you.
done the work's the best way to explain it, man. Like there's some work that if you guys have done the work, you get it. If you want to know what it is, go do the work or ask someone who has, because it'll make more sense. But once you get to that point, yeah, I feel like life actually gets a little bit smoother. Not that it gets easier per se, but you get stronger, and so you manage it,
Yeah.
and it becomes more enjoyable. Even the hard things become weirdly
Oh,
enjoyable, if that makes sense.
totally. I mean, the quality of my emotional and mental and interior life is so much better than it used to be. I mean, it's just kind of night and day.
Yeah,
I feel like if my 25-year-old self woke up in my brain today, he would think I'm enlightened. I'm not saying I'm enlightened. That's not what I'm saying.
you
I'm
would.
just saying that the difference from where the way my mental landscape was then to now, that 25-year-old would be like, oh my God, this
Yeah,
is amazing. Right.
yeah, and it's awesome because then you become a person that could be a beacon of light, man. That people come pay attention to, listen to, and the world needs a lot of that, man. And I don't think there'll ever be a
Indeed.
shortage of needing that, so to speak. So, man, I appreciate you coming on and hanging out with us. Two final questions. The first question is, if people want to come get more of you, listen to your podcast, all that great stuff, where would I send them?
Yeah, well, you can search for the One You Feed podcast in any podcast player, or you can go to our website, oneyoufeed.net. That's ONEYOUFEED.net. The podcast is there. Any programs that we're running, my spiritual habits program is there. That's kind of where it all
All
is.
that stuff. I like it. I like it. Beautiful. Second question. It's totally up to you how you answer it, but here's a question. Somebody asked me one time at a coffee shop of all places, and it stopped me in my tracks. And so I now ask everyone this question. But here's the question. What promise did God or the Creator make to the world when they created you?
There is hope.
Good one. Simple, man. I like it. I like it because you get it. Like when you understand the word of hope, people get that. It's more of like there's an example. You become an example of it. And I think that's a beautiful thing to live a life of example because at some point our light goes out, but it will have, kicked off lights of others. So I
Yeah.
appreciate you for doing that, my man.
Thank you. It's
Yeah,
been a
welcome,
pleasure.
welcome. Hey, seriously, me too. I enjoy having these conversations. I enjoy them more than I probably should because in my head I go, man, I'm full, like there's a mental full I get and I appreciate it. But it also helps me become better because I in the same pocket serve and I want to make sure I'm not serving from the echo chamber of my own mind because then I think I would stagnate the growth of others. So I love having these in-depth talks and learning stuff from people. So thank you for joining me. You in the world, thank you guys for hanging out with us. Could have been anywhere in the world, but you chose to be here with us. And then here's the thing I want you to do. Go check out the podcast, One You Feed. I'm talking 25 plus million downloads. Like this is something that other people go like, this is an amazing podcast. And so there's a reason they tune in. Go find out that reason by listening. On top of that, if something that we said today really resonated with you, it was something you said, man, it really hit me and it helped me. Think of who else it could help and simply share the episode with that person. Outside of that, again, thank you for hanging out. I appreciate you being here. Thank you for coming on and giving us your time, Eric. I really appreciate it. And that's it. As always, make the most of your off shift moments so you can make shift happen. It's Anthony Trucks and Eric Zimmer signing off. Hey, thank you for tuning into the Oz Shift podcast. I pray that we gave something amazing to your life. And if you found this episode served you in some way, I would love if you could share it with people you know, people you love, as well as your community, because you never know who needs that simple little seed that can grow into something amazing for their life. And the actual training doesn't stop here. If you want your free copy of the show notes sent to you after every episode so you can get the major points consolidated down, simply go to textanthony.com and message the word notes. Till next time, make shift happen.